Teresa, 45.
Rebecca, 44.
Lisa, 41.
Kata, 38.
Maggie, 45.
Molly, 38.
Josie, 60.
Katie, 44.
Claire, 34.
Samantha, 40.
Marsha, 66.
Welcome to INTERWOVXN's Spring and Summer season of 2022. This podcast is dedicated to women taking control of middle life's narrative through story and conversation. Each episode will bring you inspiration, information, and community relevant to middle life. This episode features a conversation between Molly and Kata as they discuss forging one's own life path, connections between art and science, and how our relationship with our bodies impacts career and life decisions. Remember to hit subscribe so you can keep coming back, and to visit our website so that you can sign up for our newsletter as well as access more resources. Find us at interwoven.com. That's INTERWOVXN.com.
Hi, Molly.
Hello, my dear. It is so nice to see your face.
It's so good to hear your voice. Yeah. You've become such a huge part of my life. And so this is just really fun to look back at how it all began and how our paths have woven in and out.
Yes, I would love that. I'm trying to remember the year. Was it 2009 or 2010?
I think it was 2010.
Okay. It was early in 2010 then.
Yeah.
Because I remember meeting you first by seeing your name on a resume. And it was this beautiful, intimidating document full of accomplishments spanning the world. And wanting to know this badass who had been involved with horticulture projects all over the globe and who had been so passionate about finding a way to impact our food systems. It was such a wild thing to meet you face to face and then to feel this sense of kinship already. And then to learn that you live down the street from me.
We're bound to meet one way or another, Molly.
Agreed. Yeah, that was the first, introduction, but it was just, I think, the first inkling of where we were going to go. Through meeting in a professional context, we were able to, I think, gain a certain amount of respect for each other's talents and abilities. But I think it was the first time when we went, and I think it was making salsa, in which we had like a real social connection beyond the weight of the workday.
Yeah, I remember, 'cause I had just moved back to Milwaukee and it had been years. I remember, and I left this magical life in Big Sur that was amazing, but also did not quite feel right to my next steps, and thinking I was totally crazy to move away from Big Sur and move back to Milwaukee. I remember being really nervous, but I'm really glad I reached out. When I was invited to come and interview, they were telling me about the different people who work there. They, of course, mentioned yourself. And I just remember walking into one of the greenhouses and there you were working on stringing up tomatoes or pruning tomatoes or something. I just had this feeling like I had known these people all my life and like finally we were getting to meet in person. Yeah. And then just having, like you said, just being able to bridge here's the professional commonalities, passion for food systems and sustainability, and then get to hang out outside of work and realize like, wow, we have so much in common and so many shared interests and complementary skill sets that it always was just such a delight to spend time with you and to know that you're only a half a block away, basically.
Finding that friendship and finding that sense of shared mission and values was such an anchoring point.
I think what really has withstood the test of time for me is just how close-knit we all became.
What's been interesting for me is I've been involved in a variety of different food systems work. I think there was so much inspiration that came out of that project. As I'm circling back around to find that the seeds that were planted, a decade plus ago, people's careers were influenced by that.
It was a catalyst for inspiration. But I think just having projects like that, that combine the best of art and science in a way that's practical.
There was so much love for the community motivating that project too. It's still inspiring to this day to think about.
I learned a lot through that experience.
And I also remember the success that you had.
Yeah, that for me is really the sweet spot, turning a potential problem into a solution.
Yeah, there's so much there in terms of the waste to resource thinking that was the motivating factor behind that business, taking aquaculture in which the wastes would normally become a water quality management issue or a wastewater disposal issue. And then the motivating factor being, let's grow plants. There's something deeply creative about that, to take, refuse and turn it into something that's a resource. I've always viewed myself, because I had, an early stage career as a fine artist. It only clicked a little over 2 years ago that my creativity and strategic thinking were one and the same. Yeah, and there's something deeply rooted when you think about like giving birth to something creatively. You have to believe in it before it's real. You have to be able to feel it in your gut and shepherd it into existence. And I think there's something that's really beautiful about that. That is the essence of creation. And that's something that I've seen you do as well. One of my highlights of our friendship was getting to travel to Belize with you.
That for me was such a huge pivoting point in my career. One, it was just so wonderful to go somewhere warm with you. And then it was such a treat to be able to introduce you to Maya Mountain Research Farm in Punta Gorda, Belize. And it was, just one of the many stops on what I had thought would be a lifetime of travel through the Americas with my then partner. One can never know how long those adventures are going to last, but what I didn't know was that it was going to forever change my life. The first time I was there was the first time I had really seen multi-strata agroforestry systems where food forest was planted to mimic a natural ecosystem in what was once a completely degraded landscape. My visit the first time was short, punctuated with some serious health issues amongst everybody on the farm. To be able to share that with you put a backdrop to at least one of those important places that have shaped me.
It was really beautiful. And I remember seeing an avocado tree that I think you had planted that was fruiting for the first time, and picturing you, in your youth with all of your wild, spirited travel lust just all over the place, planting seeds all over the globe, and being able to see one of those bear fruit was so, I don't know, just such a moving experience to experience your power in that way. It was also such a great trip because I got married right before that, and everybody assumed I was on my honeymoon when I took this trip with you. Left the new husband at home.
We celebrated. Oh my goodness, that's so funny. And it's funny that that trip for both of us, I think, was really pivotal just because we both were having questions about our professional decisions. And I remember that you were still working while we were on vacation. In fact, I remember standing in a Mayan ruin and you're on a conference call. And it's just the juxtaposition of, the ancient with the hyper modern was just, so striking to me. But also I seem to recall that, you were having serious doubts and thinking like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I had been thinking that myself in my own professional position, and then came to such a place of, no, this work is so important. I was focusing on integrated landscape management. It was absolutely exhausting, frankly, for me, terrifying because of significant health issues that I developed over the years that I was only just realizing influence. It was so interesting because that trip I said, nope, this is what I need to do. I just need to be patient and, I just need to keep my focus. And then as soon as we got back, it was like you and I traded cards. And I got back and I was like, nope, I cannot do this anymore. That was the funniest, unexpected outcome.
Well, it was. And it was also only a matter of time, I think, before I got back to the point of realizing that I needed to make changes or I wasn't going to be myself anymore, to a point where I was ready to make a change. My career had been such a challenge to really label or understand for me up until that point, because I had been drawn into food systems work, really loved the concept of aquaponics, but struggled to find viability. The unit economics were really not at a competitive place at the time in which I became involved with the industry. But the writing was on the wall. Everyone could see that at some point in the near future, it would be viable, an incentive for society to become more invested in newer forms of ag. So I believed in it, and I put so much time and energy. I just poured everything I had into it for a number of years, and then ended up having to take a step back. At that point, when I became more involved in the restaurant industry, I ended up, finding that food systems work, that it was somewhat gratifying, even if I wasn't personally growing the food, connecting with the chefs who were in need of local sourcing. And I ended up finding some really gratifying work there and taking some respite. And then I hit a point in which I felt like I needed to find a decision. I either wanted to be fully in the world of controlled environment agriculture, vertical farming, aquaponics, something in that, or I wanted to go back to school and find a way to have a greater impact on our food systems than facilitating the work of others. That job that I took in San Francisco was such a validation of all of the energy that I'd poured in to that point. And it was so exciting to be surrounded by people who shared that same like mission driven approach to their careers. You were living to work rather than working to live. And it was exciting. And it was something that helped me feel connected with my past and with my mission. And it was so hard to let it go. I realized that it was not going to be the best environment for me. And ultimately, the values that were driving the organization didn't really match with mine as much as I wanted them to. And that was a really tough decision.
I just remember being so proud of you. You needed that time. You are more than just a living to work kind of person. And it's really hard, I think, particularly as women. We find a passion that we want to give to the world. There are so many hurdles in place, regardless of who you are, where you live. There's always these hurdles. But I think particularly as women and of a certain age, there's this need to show that we have just as much of what it takes as our male counterparts.
Well, it means so much to hear that perspective because it definitely it was really challenging. I knew I was going to be putting myself in a challenging environment, moving from the Midwest to the Bay Area and being part of a very tech forward company. I don't think I realized how much cultural miscommunication there was going to be, how much my, gender and some of the experiences that I had had growing up in the Midwest as a woman were going to put me at a disadvantage in communication. If anything, I feel like I overcompensated trying to make myself fit the system that I was a part of rather than recognizing my strengths and playing to those. And it took a while for me to realize why things felt out of sync. When I think about biomimicry, and when I think about all of the elements of nature and science that inspire me, it really is about finding the way to bring all resources to play and giving them their best chance to have an impact. What was really awesome for me, I remember you applying to a variety of different programs. I remember the first time you mentioned Cornell, the tone of determination in your voice and the way in which, it sounded like you already had made it in. You already had everything figured out and you just needed to do da-da, 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 and that was all good. Which, that I know that was not a linear path, like from where your career originated and the experiences that you had in lieu of a more traditional path to then enter into an Ivy League university and then find yourself fitting into an Ivy League university. When I think about the people in my life who have given me inspiration and courage to throw myself into a completely different experience, completely across the country, you did that a lot.
I didn't even realize Cornell was an Ivy League institution until I arrived, which kind of goes to show what an odd duck I was in that environment. I had been very much drumming to my own beat. Most of my life experience was born out of just having a question or a curiosity and just moving towards it. And so doing that, I really found, what were the key elements that I was drawn to? What am I passionate about? And food systems really encompassed the story of humanity. I'd always created my own jobs, and I had repeatedly come across situations where I was hired to do a job because of my experience, but once they brought me in, my voice was discounted. I knew that if I really wanted to have an impact and have the stability in my life that I was missing, going back to school would be the next grand experiment. But little did I know that while I was finally able to focus in on subject matter that I had been craving for the last 10 years about topics that you can't learn just by doing. Things that have a lot of nuance, like, what is the impact that projects are having on the people and on the soil that they inadvertently unaware of, at the same time that I was really finding my cruise control, throwing myself in with full passion, not taking breaks, which has been a pattern I know you and I both have struggled with. But the impact of that really started to show in my health as I started to develop some really unusual symptoms. Ultimately, I didn't know it at that time, but 4 years, 5 years later would significantly impact my ability to do the work that I love. And that's something that, we don't often talk about in terms of, as women, finding our place in the world and what our gifts are and what we want to cultivate to give back to the world. There's conversations about how to incorporate working life with a home life, with having children, but there's never any conversation about protecting one's well-being and one's health. We don't really talk about, well, what happens when there's a significant injury or illness? Also, how do we maintain a healthy work-life balance when the institutions we're working for demand more from us than there is time in a 40-hour work week?
Yeah. I think the first evidence of that I really saw was actually with Jesse, my partner, who was the director of horticulture and a deeply passionate person, one of the most mission-driven and true to his values people that I've ever had the privilege of working with, calling a friend and a partner. He cared so deeply. So many mission-driven people across the board, I think, find themselves on the verge of burnout continuously. It isn't about the work, it's about the emotional and spiritual and all of this energy that you pour in on a daily basis. It isn't even necessarily about the hours, because even when you're not there, you're caring. Watching, Jesse struggle with the aftermath of that business falling apart and ultimately losing a battle with mental health and taking his life was, I think, the first time in which I saw the cost up front, felt it so deeply personally. It was something that, I was supporting someone I deeply cared about through. And I, if anything, didn't have space for my own processing because I was so deeply concerned with his path and his journey. When I came to find myself in a similar situation, I think I really relied on my husband at the time to tell me that he was really concerned that I wasn't myself. As I started hearing, what he was mirroring back to me, I started seeing signs of similar patterns as I'd seen in other people who had had really negative burnout experiences. So I knew it was time to make a change. I joined on with another company in a similar space, doing a slightly different approach, more focused on wellness, which sounded fantastic until my lack of boundaries management, I think, was a large part of it. When you care deeply about what you're doing and you care about the team that you are managing, and you can see how just past this next challenge, there's going to be an opportunity for things to come back into balance. And it's always just one more milestone away from being manageable. I ended up putting myself in a position which I think I was handling it much better than I had, but physically my body was not doing well. I was traveling far too much. I traveled 135,000 miles in 1 year. Ultimately, when I became ill in January of 2020, I think my body was in such a hypervigilant state. I was just at the perfect storm level of a virus that my body did not know how to deal with. My body was in fight or flight because I felt so stressed on a continual basis that there wasn't any respite. It took my body and my mind and my whole life to be kind of put in a completely different situation in order to kind of bring things back into balance and get me back to the point where I felt like I could function normally again. And it took the better part of a year. When it's as stark as your body refuses to function, it's not something that you can manage through. I've always been really good at managing through all sorts of challenging circumstances. But when it's full stop, there is learning that can only be gained from rest. And that rest was something that was really difficult for me. It continues to be a challenge for me to find regular time to let everything go. Because of that wake-up call, I have a very different relationship with my body and my health than I used to. You and I have had so many conversations about health over the years. It's really fascinating to me that we both found ourselves with some variety of autoimmune, broad category, undefinable on my end.
Yeah, I think similarly for me, while I don't think that it was necessarily a viral load that caused my health issues, but it was a tick bite that initiated this cascade of symptoms. So a tick that bit me likely in 2006, 2007, and increasingly revealed itself in symptoms of anaphylaxis to mammal-based products. In the midst of going back to school and pursuing a lifelong dream and, working, doing consulting, I was also trying to figure out, why was my body revolting against me? Why was I feeling so much panic and experiencing so much inflammation? For me, I feel very fortunate because it was a chance encounter, people who ultimately pointed me in the direction of a diagnosis. I remember feeling of, oh, I have a diagnosis. This is something called alpha-gal syndrome, and it's a little known tick-borne disease. But now that I know what it is and what triggers it, I'm okay now. And then, 6 months after diagnosis, I threw myself into grad school. My symptoms didn't go away. In fact, they got more sensitive. I was constantly traveling to remote locations where there was no medical care. And it's complicated even in English to explain to people, what I need to avoid. It wasn't until I took this job in DC that I also realized I could not risk my life for my job anymore. I had always said, if I'm going to die, I want to die doing what I love. Well, when that came to be challenged, I realized how foolish I was and what a privileged perspective that I would deny my body what it needed to survive. And if I died in the process, well, then what outcome would I have? What impact would I have on the world anyway? And I learned a lot about trust in leadership, realize that if I'm going to work with people, I need to be able to quite literally trust them with my life. I ended up coming back to Milwaukee, starting consulting remotely till I had a significant health crisis where a significant event quite literally changed the way your body, the way your cells respond to stimulus. The amount of stress over time actually made it so that my mast cells, the cells that are in control of the body's response to toxins, allergens, virus, bacteria, overreacted to the most innocuous of influences. Whereas before, I would only really have a significant reaction if I had cross-contamination with dairy product or some kind of mammal byproduct. Suddenly, I was having the same kind of responses, but to pea shoots or oatmeal or things that I had few ingredients that I had kind of relied upon as kind of comfort food. My body was, retaliating against. And I had already been going through quite a bit of processing and grief of the likelihood of needing to step away from my international work and my own life's purpose, and trying to reimagine what it meant to be Kata in a world where I couldn't work in the tropics. And then this happened, and it was like a whole new layer of grief. Relearning what to eat the first time with alpha-gal was a huge challenge. But then with mast cell activation syndrome, relearning what I could eat on top of the alpha-gal, whole other level. For me, now that I'm 6 months into this, relearning how to take care of my body, I've learned a whole new appreciation for my body and also of my relative health. Not only have I taken hold of my life on those days that I have full energy and decided to pick up skiing again after 27 years and go ice skating and things that I wasn't sure I would ever do again because of the deep dive I've had to do into health and nutrition, food chemistry, and the irony of experiencing true food insecurity after studying food security for years and working on food security issues. So I find there is some greater wisdom in the madness, and that perhaps, you and I, Molly, in our experiences can help connect with other women.
Yeah, I think there's something really beautiful about deepening your relationship with your body that has come out of this for me. So much of our culture values what we do and what we get done and what we're able to make happen. For me, this last few years has really been more about acknowledging the subtleties of responses within my body, learning to listen, learning to be and really understand all of the different modes of being, finding ways to nourish. That's been something that I don't think I had a lot of awareness or a lot of exposure to growing up. It felt like everything was an activity because there's so much of being that is necessary being present, being mindful in making art that is worthy of the time and effort put into it. And I think that's one of the things that I've always wanted to be able to share with more people as I think about where my life experiences are leading me next, is the opportunity to pull more of my creative practices and this relationship with my body and the experiences that I've had with health and boundaries and limitations into more of a practice that can be shared with others. And I don't know where that's going to go next.
I mean, at the end of the day, nobody spends their last living moments on earth wishing they had worked just a little bit harder. People always think about the moments when they could have appreciated that sunset, or they could have spent more time with their loved ones, or they could have pursued, a creative outlet. For me, that's kind of that last lingering question is really what highlights what's important in life. Life pushes us. The time during, COVID shutdown was so nurturing for me because it really put into perspective what is worth my time, and how do I earn a right livelihood while also honoring my body, just the simple acts of living that bring life joy. And I think it's a real challenge in this time to find work that allows us to be both human beings, but I think that's also the important work really is finding a way to be thoughtful and kind to our bodies as much as we are pouring our passions into our work.
I am fortunate to have a network of brilliant, talented women that I connect with regularly. And I will say there's a lot of talk about this shared experience that we've had during this pandemic. And there are a lot of really insightful conversations happening, fresh energy that's been introduced. So I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to integrate and shift the systems in which we operate for the better. It's really exciting to see that there is a human drive and tendency to take these challenging, painful experiences and channel them into something that creates joy. And removing any outcome expectations from the equation and just experimenting, free associating, low pressure, high spontaneity exploration of new areas is such a fundamental part of our human experience, and it has so much power.
So Molly, as you are nearing our 4th decade, what are some of the things that you are learning that it's okay to let go of? What are some things that you're learning that you want to hold on to into this next phase of your life?
Well, my 30s have been a really exciting adventure. I think that it's been a tremendous experience to embrace some of my strengths and take some bigger risks and have just a wider variety of life experiences than I think I had the courage to undertake in my 20s. What has shifted that's allowed that is my shift in my relationship with fear. My teens were really dominated by immense fear of social situations. I had a lot of intense social anxiety and just general anxiety about life, about all of the expectations that were placed on my shoulders as a high achiever and the way in which I was going to make my life go according to plan. Little did I know there is no life that goes according to plan. My 20s were, really focused on, listening to where I wanted to go next, but I still was very fear averse. Move across the country and take a risk at a new job. That was the first time in which I really, I think, looked fear squarely in the face and said, I'm not listening to you. We're going to try this. And, over time, I've actually grown to really appreciate fear as a signal for growth. It has always balanced with listening to my gut. Truly exciting is having enough faith in myself to take bigger risks. So I wouldn't say that I've completely let go of fear as much as I've shifted the way in which I interact with it. Another thing that I think I've really benefited from is letting go of labels and starting to just embrace my own read on the world. It helps me better understand the world from my perspective, and ultimately that's the perspective that I value most. The other thing that I've started to make some good ground on, I have a lot of room to grow, is letting go of the desire to keep people happy or make people happy. People pleasing is such a part of many cultures, but especially I think the culture in which I was raised quiets my presence. I want to stand and really take up my space. That's the thing that I wish I could tell myself as a kid, is to trust my gut. How about you, Kata?
You touched on a lot of very similar themes. The first thing that I think about for me is fear as well. And for me, my 20s was a time of really confronting fear. That vehicle for me was quite literally hitchhiking, single, young 20-something. I did it quite intentionally to kind of play with the boundaries of my own courage. And that experience allowed me to hear and feel, when is fear a useful signal to pull back and protect your life and well-being, and when is it fake friend who is whispering insecurities in your ear that is actually holding you back. My 30s was a time to really understand that difference and how to ask for help. I'm learning that it's absolutely okay to ask for help. I'm learning how to ask and learning to know what is it that I need that would help me, and who's my tribe? Who are my tried and true? And that took me many, many years to be able to discern. I think the big theme for me has been kind of a combination of an attachment to outcomes, not achieving those outcomes. Part of that is this really ego-driven idea of what it means to achieve and what it means to be successful from an external point of view. What I'm learning is that sometimes the initial vision of what inspires you to take action or to lead a charge is just that. It's to initiate that first movement, to have the courage to do something new. It's not a linear experience that has a start, a middle, and an end. It can change shape and change focus and change importance. What's most important is staying present. I'm really learning that I want to hold on to my curiosity so that I'm not so attached to a fixed outcome. I'm learning to hold on to my own self-trust. I have survived, and I'll get through this one way or another. The wisdom that is in my body is the wisdom of both intuition and discernment. Those are the things that I want to hold on to.
This has been such a wonderful conversation, Kata.
We always leave our conversations just feeling so grounded, so loved.
This is why you're one of my sisters, chosen sisters forever.
Absolutely. Same. I love you so much.
I love you too, Kata.
Thanks for your presence here with us today. We invite you to keep coming back and to weave your story into legacy. Subscribe now and visit INTERWOVXN to sign up for our newsletter and access more resources. The show's copyright is May of 2022. We want to thank our sponsors and affiliates as well as our producers, Teresa Kopak, Rebecca Jankowski, and Jen Gilmore of Soundfort Studios. All original music was created and performed by Gina Barrington. A special thanks to Molly and Kata for sharing their stories with us.